In June 2024, the Immigration Control Act and the TITP Act have been revised. As a result, TITP will be replaced by the Employment for Skill Development Program, aimed at both developing and securing human resources in industrial fields with labor shortages. The ESD program will come into effect on April 2027. The purpose of ESD is to develop human resources with skills at the level of specified skilled worker 1 through 3 years of employment in Japan, as well as to secure human resources in industrial fields with labor shortages. The fields of acceptance for ESD are those that are suitable for enabling employees to acquire skills through employment in the specified industrial fields of the SSW. Besides the basic policy, field-specific operation policy for each ESD industrial field will be established by government agencies and industries in each field. The expected number of acceptances per field, which will be the upper limit of acceptance, will be announced by the end of 2025. These are the different points from the previous Technical Intern Training program. Major features of the new programs are: first is to introduce an accreditation system of employment for skill development plans by the new organization which will replace OTIT, Employment for Skill Development Organization, ESDO. The ESD plans include the term within 3 years, job category, skill goals such as Japanese language proficiency, and other details. Second is to introduce a licensing system for supervising and support organizations responsible for supervising the proper implementation of ESD plans and mediating employment relationship between foreign nationals and implementing organizations. As supervising organizations in TITP, supervising and support organizations must obtain the license, and the standards for licensing will become stricter. Proper sending mechanisms will be required and accepting environment will be improved. Sending countries,
in principle,
cannot send their nationals unless they have concluded a memorandum of cooperation with Japan. Also, there will be no acceptance of foreign nationals from countries that do not fulfill their obligation to take back their own nationals. The government of Japan plans to ask sending countries to introduce a system to ensure that the fees paid by their nationals to sending organizations are not unreasonably high. The fee shall be within the amount equivalent of 2 months of the foreign nationals' expected wages. If costs exceed this amount, accepting organizations
might
be asked to voluntarily provide support to reduce the burden on the foreign nationals. In addition, the government of Japan plans to protect the rights of skill development employees, which will be called SDEs, by allowing them to transfer job places at their own will under certain conditions. This is an overview of the ESD and SSW programs. SDEs are required to pass a Japanese language test equivalent to A1 or higher, such as the Japanese language proficiency test N5, or take an equivalent Japanese language lectures before starting the program. The ESD period is expected to last for 3 years. There is no division such as TITP1 or TITP2 in the ESD program. If an STE wants to become a specified skill worker 1 after finishing 3 years of the ESD program, they must pass both the skill test and the Japanese language test. The skill tests include grade 3 of the trade skill test or SSW1 evaluation test. The Japanese language tests include the tests of A2 or higher level, for example, the JLPT N4. The requirement to take exams before becoming SSW is a key difference from TITP. Without undergoing ESD at all, foreign nationals will still be able to become SSW1 by taking the tests overseas or in Japan. During the ESD period, if SDEs pass both the required skill test and the Japanese language test, they may be able to switch to SSW1 after they have worked certain period in the current accepting organization for ESD. If SDEs fail the exam of SSW1 after finishing 3 years of the ESD program, they will be allowed to continue staying in Japan for up to 1 year as an SDE to take the exam again. Furthermore, if SDEs wish to transfer job places during their ESD period, they must pass both the basic grade of trade skill test in the field they are working and the Japanese language test of the level of A1 or higher. The fields of acceptance for ESD will be mostly the same as those for SSW, but the fields that are not suitable for training in Japan without certain licenses will not be eligible. Currently, industries such as automobile transportation and aviation are not expected to be eligible. If SSW1 workers wish to become SSW2 after working for 5 years, they need to pass both the SSW2 evaluation test and a B1 or higher level of Japanese language test. There is no limit to the number of times for renewing the period of stay for SSW2. This is the image of the entities involved in ESD. Details will be determined in MOCs. The left side shows the sending countries, governments, and sending organizations. In ESD, job place transfers are allowed under certain conditions, so the Japanese Public Employment Security Office, which is called Hello Work, will support the job place transfer of SDEs besides supervising and support organizations and ESDO. This is the accreditation criteria for ESD plans. The first part is the standards for the treatment of SDEs. As in TITP, the remuneration paid to SDEs must be equal to or greater than the amount that would be paid to Japanese workers engaged in the same type of work. If SDEs are required to regularly bear expenses such as food or housing, the amounts must be charged as actual cost, and they need to fully understand and agree to these costs. Remuneration for SDEs must be paid into a bank or other financial account under their own name as designated by them. Discriminatory treatment in employment conditions on the grounds of being foreign is prohibited. If SDEs wish to temporarily return to their home country, they must be granted the necessary paid leave. As in TITP, supervising and support organizations or implementing organizations for ESD must secure appropriate accommodation for SDEs. During the post-entry lectures period, allowances must be provided to SDEs so that they can concentrate on their lectures. Furthermore, the costs that implementing organizations pay to supervising and support organizations may not, either directly or indirectly, be collected from SDEs. The second part is the standards for implementing organizations for ESD. As in TITP, if SDEs return to their home country after completing the program, their supervising and support organizations must bear the travel expenses and take necessary measures to ensure their smooth return. Supervising and support organizations and implementing organizations are prohibited from receiving financial or material benefits or entertainment exceedingly socially acceptable standards from sending organizations or overseas preparatory organizations. Also, they must take measures to be able to monitor and understand the health and living conditions of SDEs. The final part is the standards for SDEs. They must be at least 18 years old, healthy, and of good conduct. Unlike in TITP, there are no requirements for prior work experience. These are the requirements for sending organizations. First, the fees paid by foreign nationals to sending organizations need to be within the amount of 2 months of the monthly remuneration in their ESD plans. As in TITP, sending organizations must understand the purpose of the program, appropriately select foreign nationals, and mediate them to supervising and support organizations. They must also verify that the selected foreign nationals are of good conduct. With respect to fees and other costs, collected from foreign nationals or supervising and support organizations, the basis of calculation must be clearly defined and disclosed, for example, via the Internet. These costs must also be explained and presented clearly to the foreign nationals and supervising and support organizations, ensuring their full understanding. Furthermore, as in TITP, if sending organizations or their executives have engaged in any of the following acts within the past 5 years, they will not meet the requirements as a sending organization. First, collecting security deposits or managing the money or property of the foreign nationals, family, or relatives. Second, stipulating penalty clauses for non-fulfillment of contracts related to ESD or unjustly collecting money or property. Third, committing acts of human rights violations such as assaults, threats, or restriction of freedom against foreign nationals. If sending organizations or their executives have, within the past 5 years, provided or promised benefits or entertainment exceeding a socially acceptable amount to supervising and support organizations or implementing organizations, they will also not meet the requirements as a sending organization. These are the cases where SDEs wish to restart ESD after returning to their home country. The first case is where SDEs seek accreditation of new ESD plan in the same job category after returning to their home country. To receive such accreditation, besides being the same job category as in the previous plan, the foreign nationals must also have unavoidable circumstances. The unavoidable circumstances include the cancellation of accreditation of the previous plan due to reasons not attributable to the SDEs, or any cases deemed reasonable to accept the individual again as an SDE from the perspective of proper implementation of the program and protection of SDEs. The next case is where SDEs, having returned to their home country partway through the program, seek accreditation of new ESD plan in a different job category. This would be applicable, for example, in cases of occupational mismatch. However, the total period of the previous ESD program before departure must not exceed 2 years. Furthermore, in ESD, if SDEs do not pass the required skills test or the Japanese language test by the end of the program, the period can be extended within the duration necessary for passing the tests up to 1 year. During this extension, the SDEs will continue engaging in ESD. Dispatch is also possible. In the fields of agriculture and fishery and aquaculture, SDEs can be accepted by certain organizations such as agricultural cooperatives and dispatched to up to 3 implementing organizations. If the accepting organization itself implements the ESD program, the maximum number of the dispatch destinations will be 2. If ESDs need to move between workplaces or relocate, the receiving side must bear the associated costs. The stable payment of remuneration to ESDs must be ensured under labor dispatch contracts. If a suspension of work occurs due to reasons attributable to the dispatch destinations, the dispatching organizations must pay the SDEs an allowance equal to at least 60% of the average wage for the duration of the suspension. In the fields of agriculture and fishery and aquaculture, SDEs are also allowed to temporarily return to their home country once a year by pausing the program for a certain period. In such cases, the total program period in their ESD plans must be designed to be 3 years of stay. The travel expenses for these temporary returns must be borne by their supervising and support organization. Lectures covering language, immigration and labor laws, everyday life, and skill knowledge. As in TITP, SDEs undergo pre-entry lectures in their sending countries and post-entry lectures conducted by supervising and support organizations in Japan before starting the program. When the SDEs have not passed a Japanese language test of A1 level or above, their supervising and support organization must provide at least 320 hours of post-entry lectures. However, if they have already completed pre-entry lectures of 160 hours or more within the past 6 months, required hours can be reduced to 160 or more. When the SDEs have already passed a Japanese language test of A1 level or above, the required hours of post-entry lectures are at least 220 hours. However, if they have completed pre-entry lectures of 110 hours or more within the past 6 months and already passed the test, required hours can be reduced to 110 or more. The following are the subjects of post-entry lectures. The first subject is the Japanese language. If the SDEs have not passed a Japanese language test of A1 level or above, they must complete at least 100 hours of A1 level lectures of the employment curriculum in an accredited Japanese language institute. However, for a certain period after the enforcement of ESD lectures taught by registered Japanese language teachers will be accepted instead of accredited institutions. Also, if the SDEs have completed A1 level employment curriculum offered by an accredited Japanese language institute or registered Japanese language teachers in their home country, including online lectures, those hours can be counted. In addition to the Japanese language, other lecture subjects include general knowledge of daily life in Japan, legal protection concerning immigration or labor-related laws, knowledge necessary for the smooth acquisitions of skills in Japan. During the program period, implementing organizations must provide measures to allow SDEs to take at least 100 hours of A2 level lectures of the employment curriculum in an accredited Japanese language institute so that they can pass a Japanese language test of the A2 level. If the SDEs have already passed an A2 level Japanese language test, they are not required to take those lectures. These are the procedures and main conditions for job place transfers. From the perspective of consistent human resource development over the 3-year period, transfers are limited to the same job category. The procedure requires the SDEs to submit a request for a change of implementing organization and their new implementing organizations to apply for accreditation of a new ESD plan. In TITP, transfers were allowed only in unavoidable circumstances such as a serious breach of the employment contract or human rights violations. In ESD, in addition to these cases, conditions to allow voluntary job place transfers have been introduced. First, the SDEs must have exceeded the job place transfer restriction period stipulated for each ESD industrial field, 1 to 2 years depending on industrial field. Second, the SDEs must have passed both a skill test, such as the basic grade of the National Trade Skills Test and the Japanese language test equivalent to A1 or higher, as defined for each field. Other than supervising and support organizations, employment placement for SDEs can only be conducted by public institutions such as ESDO and Hello Work. The new implementing organizations receiving transferred SDEs cannot accept more than a certain ratio compared to the number of SDEs they are already accepting. In addition, the new implementing organization must pay the previous implementing organization a specified amount of reimbursement to cover initial costs related to mediation and training of the transferred SDEs. This is the outline of target fields for acceptance in SSW or ESD. There will be 17 ESD industrial fields and 19 specified industrial fields for SSW. Among the specified industrial fields, the automobile transportation and the aviation industry will only be for SSW. These are the breakdown of fields and job categories for acceptance in SSW or ESD. Some are new categories to be introduced. This is the provisional list of the restriction period and Japanese language proficiency requirement for voluntary job place transfer in each ESD industrial field. This will be specified in field-specific operation policies. The job place transfer restriction period will be 1 to 2 years. If the restriction period exceeds 1 year and SDEs choose to stay, the implementing organizations are required to improve employment conditions such as remuneration after the first year. When the field's specified transfer restriction period is more than 1 year and the implementing organizations voluntarily choose only 1 year restriction period, there is no obligation for them to improve employment conditions.
So far, I have provided an overview of the Employment for Skill Development Program as outlined in the slides. Now I would like to elaborate further on newly confirmed matters as of November 2025. First, let us review the previous slides. This slide states that the date of enforcement for the ESD program shall be a date within 3 years specified by a ministerial order, and it has been set as April 1st, 2027. Besides passing basic grade of trade skill tests and certain Japanese language tests, requirements specified in the field-specific operation policies may be added depending on the field. Sending organizations are required to be recommended by the government of the sending country based on the Memorandum of Cooperation (MOC). In TITP, a recommendation from a public organization in the country or region where sending organizations are located was also required. First, I'd like to explain the standards for the treatment of skill development employees. The job place transfer period varies between 1 to 2 years, depending on the ESD industrial field, which will be stipulated in field-specific operation policies. If the job place transfer restriction period exceeds 1 year, improvement of the treatment of SDEs stipulated in the field-specific operation policies, such as salary increases, must be implemented. The field-specific operation policies are currently under consideration for each industry and are scheduled to be decided by December this year. Next, I would like to explain the standards for implementing organizations for ESD. When concluding an employment contract with SDEs, implementing organizations are required to explain the terms and conditions of employment either in person or online, in a language that SDEs can fully understand. Lastly, I would like to explain the standards for skill development employees. The requirements for prior work experience and the plan to return to the same work in the home country as set in TITP have been abolished. Regarding the requirement for good behavior, number 3, proof of the absence of certain criminal records will be required in some form. The format of this proof will be stipulated in the MOCs. If a lack of authenticity arises with this proof after entry, deportation proceedings will be initiated. It is stipulated that the fees paid by SDEs to sending organizations must not exceed the amount of 2 months' salary of the SDE. It is considered illegal to set the monthly salary for the first year higher than the second year because of this rule. Please look at the conditions for a voluntary change of employers. The ratio of the transferred employees in the receiving implementing organization is restricted. In particular, the ratio of SDEs transferred from the implementing organization in the rural area to the urban area is restricted to a maximum of 1/6 of the total number of SDEs after the transfer. In other cases, the total number of voluntarily transferred SDEs must not exceed 1/3 of the total number of SDEs after the transfer in the receiving implementing organization. The same rate applies to small implementing organizations accepting fewer than 6 SDEs in total, which means the number of voluntarily transferred SDEs able to be accepted in those implementing organizations may be one or none. Now, let us move on to the additional slides. This is an overview of the stakeholders involved in the ESD program. Sending organizations are subject to both prohibits on granting benefits and requirements to enhance transparency. For ESD candidates, requirements for good behavior and upper limits on fees to pay to sending organizations have been established. Furthermore, after entry, SDEs are required to work aiming to acquire the skills and Japanese language proficiency needed for SSW1. However, this does not necessarily stipulate that SDEs must transition to SSW1. Voluntary job place transfer is allowed under certain conditions, but it is restricted to the same job category. This slide focuses on Japanese language learning in pre-entry and post-entry lectures. Many people from sending countries or sending organizations might be interested in this topic. SDEs are required to have passed an A1 equivalent Japanese language test, such as JLPT-N5, upon entry. If they have not passed the test, they must complete 100 hours of the employment curriculum provided either by an accredited Japanese language institute or by a registered Japanese language teacher as part of the post-entry lectures before initial works. On top of that, SDEs must complete 100 hours of the employment curriculum at an accredited Japanese language institute or a course taught by a registered Japanese language teacher, aiming to attain the A2 level of Japanese language proficiency, such as JLPT-N4 or JFT Basic. Pre- and post-entry lectures differ depending on whether the SDEs have passed equivalent Japanese language tests. This slide outlines the patterns. First, if they have not passed the Japanese language proficiency test N5 or equivalent, they will require a total of 320 hours of lectures. The most common case may be, as in TITP, completing 160 hours of pre-entry lectures and then 160 hours of post-entry lectures in Japan, including 100 hours of Japanese language lectures in the employment curriculum at an accredited Japanese language institute or a course taught by a registered Japanese language teacher. If they can complete the employment curriculum at an accredited Japanese language institute or a course taught by a registered Japanese language teacher in their home country, those hours can also be included. Lectures by a registered Japanese language teacher must be conducted with no more than 20 students per class. Next, for candidates who have passed tests such as the JLPT-N5, the total lecture hours amount to 220 hours. This may comprise 110 hours of pre-entry lectures and 110 hours of post-entry lectures. The curriculum may be the same as that for the TITP. Even when providing Japanese language lectures, as long as SDEs pass the language test, they are not necessary to be in the employment curriculum at an accredited Japanese language institute or a course taught by a registered Japanese language teacher. In other words, a key difference from the TITP is that sending countries and sending organizations must be aware that if SDEs have not passed the JLPT-N5 or equivalent at the time of entry, any Japanese language education provided in their home country will not be recognized as qualifying Japanese language lecture hours unless it was delivered by an accredited Japanese language institute or a registered Japanese language teacher. Conversely, if SDEs have passed the JLPT-N5 or equivalent, the pre-entry lecture will be 110 hours and the post-entry lectures will be 110 hours. Please refer to the 4 patterns within the box. From the perspective of the accepting side, if both successful and unsuccessful candidates are among the SDEs entering at the same time, their lecture hours will differ. Consequently, the curriculum may vary for SDEs arriving simultaneously. Furthermore, the timing of their placement with the implementing organization will also differ. As a result, management becomes more complex depending on the individual circumstances of each SDE, increasing the burden on supervising and support organizations and implementing organizations. Furthermore, in the ESD program, even after completing the post-entry lectures and being assigned to the implementing organization, SDEs must complete 100 hours of either the employment curriculum at an accredited Japanese language institute or a course taught by a registered Japanese language teacher targeting A2 level such as JLPT N4 or JFT Basic. This slide explains the quota for accepting SDEs under the ESD program. In TITP, the maximum number of technical intern trainees that could be accepted was determined based on the number of full-time staff in the implementing organization. This remains the same under the ESD program. The number of full-time staff does not include SDEs or technical intern trainees. However, it does include foreign nationals holding specified skilled worker or other work-related residential status. On the other hand, in TITP, because there were distinctions between TITP 1, 2, and 3, if the number of full-time staff in the implementing organization is under 30, it could accept at least 3 technical intern trainees per year. However, in the ESD program, there is no annual distinction on residential statuses, so the acceptance quota for SDEs will be for the total number of SDEs from the first year to the third year. Please look at the table. For example, the implementing organization with 2 full-time staff would previously have accepted 3 technical intern trainees annually, totaling 9. 3 technical intern trainees 1, 3 technical intern trainees 2 in their first year, and 3 technical intern trainees 2 in their second year. However, you need to be cautious that in the ESD program, the maximum total for SDEs in the first to third year is set at 6. For excellent implementing organizations, which are outstanding in terms of achievements in developing skills and Japanese language proficiency, whether the supervising and support organization is excellent or not, please refer to the quotas in column 2. We shall update the videos as the situation regarding program revisions develops. The updated videos can be purchased via the JISCO website. Please await further notice.